So I'll start where I left off yesterday. We're on our last day of dealing with the Hindrances, and in terms of our readings, but not our actual having to deal with them. So hopefully this can help dispel some further issues we have with the 5 hindrances. This is Ajahn Succito from The Most Precious Gift, page 389. Sorry, page 391. Wrong page. Here we go. Page 399. It took me maybe 10 or 20 years to undo lots of pressures, stresses, contractions, wrong views about meditation, bottled up irritation, grief, depression, compulsions, urgencies, trying to get it right, inner tyrants, the whole thing. It doesn't mean to say that I didn't have times when I would say, "Oh, this is very nice," but they would all tend to come back again. Maybe that's the way it goes. You get times when the mind finds its way through the hindrances, and then they come back again. It's not just a one-shot. You keep crossing that territory time and time again until it no longer causes you doubt or confusion. Doubt is the hindrance that cuts away the path. You keep crossing that territory until you notice that particular hindrance is not present as much. Now it's not triggered by that. This thing triggers it, but that thing doesn't. You start to notice and take joy in the number of times you are not caught in ill will or sense desire. These 2 hindrances have a very broad meaning. They can refer to strong mental states, but they have subtler forms too. They don't pass away until there's a profound degree of realization, but we can get breaks, and at those moments we can touch into something more joyful. Somebody wrote a question about devotional practices. How do those fit in? Devotional practices are for joy. They're encouragements. They're opportunities for rejoicing, celebrating. One thing that makes it possible to experience joy is knowing that the Blessed One is here. I have received His Dhamma. It has told me there is nothing wrong with me. This is indicating the way out of stress. I've been given the way, the keys. There is joy to have even touched into the possibility of that. I have been seen as a worthy human being who can try to cultivate the way. I have sensed myself in that. I have touched into the joy of being harmless. How wonderful. That's what devotional practices are. We often use images, conventional words, or flowers, incense, and candles, but don't get too mesmerized by the images. They're just signs that you can use. Why do we bow? Bowing involves the body, doesn't it? It's a movement of the body into a softness, into a lay it down. Don't try to figure out devotion and ask, what exactly are you doing this for? What purpose do you see in placing your head upon the ground? From a heart level, sometimes it's really the only thing you want to do. You just want to surrender and put your head down. This proud, arrogant head, with its conceits, its views, and its ideas, just lay it down. These ideas of I am, I shouldn't, people should think this is of me, and why am I? Just lay them down. But remember, this is not a command. There comes a time when that is really a lovely experience. Devotional practices are for that loveliness, for that celebration, for that mudita. Mudita means taking joy in that which is good and really taking it in. The trigger of joy doesn't have to be about me anymore. Even in this conventional Buddhist culture, I don't think people necessarily understand the practice of bowing. They just do it and get a real sense of faith and support from that. They feel in a safe place. Now I'm empowered. I have the Buddha's teachings with me. I have the Buddha's presence with me. Great. When you experience piti, be mindful of it, sense it, survey it, and cool it so that it doesn't get more excited. Sometimes when people experience piti, it can come in great rushing waves. Tears start coming and you feel like you are lifting off the ground. This may be incomprehensible to somebody who has never experienced it. If it comes on too strongly, you need to put your attention on the body or the back. Breathing out, grounding. When the experience turns into something more contented, it's called passaddhi, the fifth enlightenment factor. We feel tranquil, calm, and soothed. The citta unfolds a little bit more. Samadhi, the sixth bojjhanga, comes when the sense fields begin to quiet down. The sense fields may seem like fields we can run out into, but actually they're things that hold us in. They limit us. They limit our experience within sights and sounds. Once we begin to experience piti and sukha, we don't see them as fields anymore, but as a cage, something that is limiting our experience. There's a change of priority. There still can be impact, sight, sound, smell, taste, or touch, but the mind wants to spread wider, and samadhi is what enables that. You may think that these meditation masters who sit in a manky old hut in a desolate forest are tough ascetics, but they're actually sitting there feeling blissed out. This experience of samadhi can be very transformative and quite astounding. There are incredible stories of people whose minds have opened to a profound degree, describing the sensitivities and the world that this openness presents. In this unification of mind, there is centeredness and poise. Its tone is evenness and equanimity, upekkha, which is the seventh and last enlightenment factor. The citta is unfolded. There are no creases left. There are no preferences. There are no contractions. There is no differentiation in the subject-object. It's all even. The citta has evened out. The realization of nibbana implies that things have gone out. That which we thought was real and solid has proven to be a shadow. Once a crease is gone, its shadow is gone. Nothing has actually been destroyed. That strange thing which seemed so real, so me, so energized, has simply opened out. But some shadows are very strong and seem so clearly there, don't they? This is the map, but consider it very simply as the progressive unfolding of the potential for real beauty. Piti is beautiful, for real ease, for deep, spacious opening and poise. That evenness gives you huge authority over the senses because you recognize it's this, it's that. But it's not bothering me. It's not pulling me in. It's not something I have to get. There's the freedom of release. I talked about relationship right at the beginning of the retreat because it's what practice is about. We're coming out of contracted relationships of liking, disliking, holding on, and rejecting. Those are contracted ways of relating to experience, aren't they? But sati doesn't partake in that. There is liking, there is disliking. But it's just something that is happening. That's not where I'm standing. I'm standing aware of liking and disliking and not following, not projecting, not proliferating around those energies. As a result, the hindrances starve. By being aware, mindful, but not following the proliferations, you withdraw their energy. You're withdrawing the demon's hostility by not giving it any. The demon loves hostility. It feeds on fear. It loves you to feel like you're a wreck. But now you're telling it, no, you're not having any of that. Here is loving kindness instead. Here is an open body. Here is presence instead. That makes the demon shrink. It's not that you adore demons, but you relate to them differently. When you face a demon, you may feel you want to tighten up, but see if you can work against that tendency. Feel less guilty and ashamed, less lost and confused. How does this work? What triggers this demon? What happens? What happens in my body? What does my mind start to weave out of that? See if you can reduce the proliferation, slow it down, take it back a little and ask yourself, where is the real point of this? Often it comes back to simple things such as pain or feeling attacked. As we cultivate those satipatthana, we recognize this is a mind state, this is a feeling. This is not so easy, but if you hold the mind state and withdraw its energy, then your enlightenment energy will increase. You can't get rid of the energy of the hindrances, but you can transfer it. Then, amazingly enough, you begin to be able to be with ill will, just sensing it as a kind of buzzy, grumpy, edgy state. But it's not jumping onto anybody, it's just hovering. That's very good. Now you can try to feel it more in terms of your heart, with loving kindness and acceptance. You start starving it and using it. That energy then shifts to the enlightenment factors of investigation, energy, and piti. Over time, you'll even be able to come to a very strong trigger of feeling without reacting to it. You can probably do this in your body, at least to a degree. When you feel physical pain, you don't contract around it. Being able to practice with pain is a skillful thing, but it doesn't mean that you are staying with it until your muscles rip. This is a workshop. We can't really fix physical pain, but it's much less penetrating than psychological and emotional pain. It's just there, and here I am with it. Now, can I change my relationship to it? In order to do that, you're widening your focus, feeling the entire leg, if the pain is in the leg, or even the entire body with gentle goodwill. You're widening, not contracting. You stay with the pain or discomfort for about 5 minutes. This kind of workshop is going to help when it comes down to the real business, which is the pain of the citta. The pain of the citta is something that's formed. Its whole way of operating is very profound. So you really need the qualities of piti and samadhi before it becomes possible to be mindful of it and to investigate. In the Anapanasati Sutta, the first tetrad has to do with the body. The Buddha takes it through to the point where you begin to experience calming the body. The quality of piti comes after that. When you're in your breathing space, you start to feel some lift. Then you're thoroughly sensing the citta sankhara, which is what activates your citta, your mental feelings, your mental and emotional triggers. We require the fullness of energy and the fullness of heart to be with the citta sankhara before we can really ease into it and calm the grief, the fear, the agitation, the hostility, the sadness, the sense of never having made it, never going to make it, the failure, etc. Piti is the sign that there's a real capacity to do that. Before that stage, you just have to keep sidelining the present experience. Okay, there is that. You're coming to your good place, and as that fills up, you'll naturally find, now is the possibility to meet my place of despair. But don't go into that until you have your faculties together. There's no point going into your difficult places again and sinking into the same overwhelmed state. First, you want to properly build up your capacity. Don't climb down until you have good legs. A lot of our practice is just about building up the self-respect, the faith, and the faculties for this process. It takes time, but there's nothing else to do, and it is the true way. If we know this, if we feel the confidence that we're on the true way, it will lead to a lessening of the burden of dukkha. These external practices of devotion, chanting, loving-kindness, helping and respecting each other, breathing in and out are all part of it. It's holistic. The way is not a technique, it's a way of living. Now is the time to gain some confidence in that. As we're coming towards the last couple of days of the retreat, you want to use this time not for simply getting into some nice, calm state, but for finding the places of certainty that you can take with you. This is what I have to do to reorganize how I'm operating. I don't want to come to another retreat in the same wrecked state again. You want to move on. The clearer you are about your trigger points and your faculties, the smoother and more progressive your experience is going to be. I find with Lumpur Succito's voice, it's there's a particular way of expressing himself is sort of like rounding out the edges, sort of as we sometimes read the Buddhist suttas, or we get some of the kind of brief explanations I was speaking out about yesterday, or pithy phrases or things, but it really, having modern commentary, especially the way that Lumpur expresses himself and gets to the quite felt sense of our experience and how to work with that experience, I find it incredibly valuable. I often think about how much gratitude I have for our teachers who've delved so much into the practice and are here currently with us that can explain the practice more than just reading the suttas themselves. So this is from the Buddha. This is just a brief statement he has to say that the hindrances and the 7 factors of awakening. This is trees. This is from the Bojjhanga Samyutta Nikaya, 46, Sutta 39. Bhikkhus, there are huge trees with tiny seeds and huge bodies, encirclers of other trees, and the trees which they encircle become bent, twisted, and split. And what are those huge trees with tiny seeds and huge bodies? The asata, the banyan, the pilaka, the udumbara, the kachaka, and the kapitana. These are those huge trees with tiny seeds and huge bodies, encirclers of other trees, and the trees which they encircle become bent, twisted, and split. So too, bhikkhus, when some clansman here has left behind sensual pleasures and gone forth from the household life into homelessness, he becomes bent, twisted, and split because of those same sensual pleasures, or because of others worse than them. These 5 bhikkhus are obstructions, hindrances, encirclers of the mind, weakeners of wisdom. What 5? Sensual desire is an obstruction, a hindrance encircling the mind, a weakener of wisdom, ill will, sloth and torpor, restlessness and remorse. Doubt is an obstruction, a weakener of wisdom. These are the 5 obstructions, hindrances, encirclers of the mind, weakeners of wisdom. These 7 factors of enlightenment, bhikkhus, are non-obstructions, non-hindrances, non-encirclers of the mind. When developed and cultivated, they lead to the realization of the fruit of true knowledge and liberation. What 7? The enlightenment factor of mindfulness is a non-obstruction. The enlightenment factor of equanimity is a non-obstruction. And so on. These 7 factors of enlightenment are non-obstructions, non-hindrances, non-encirclers of the mind. When developed and cultivated, they lead to the realization of the fruit of true knowledge and liberation. So we'll be coming to an entire section of studying the 7 factors of enlightenment towards the end of the retreat, but they're very worthy sort of factors or pathways on the path to kind of bring up in terms of like dealing with these 5 hindrances. So I'll just read something that Bhikkhu Nalayo, Bhante Nalayo, has to say about the hindrances. This is from Satipatthana Meditation, a practice guide. So this is chapter 8 on hindrances. With the 6th spoke in the wheel of practice presented here, we move into the domain of the 4th Satipatthana, contemplation of dharmas. In a way, of the 4th Satipatthana is a continuation of contemplation of the mind by way of selecting specific mental states and factors, the hindrances and the awakening factors. In the mode of practice presented here, the 3 body contemplations under the 1st Satipatthana have their counterpart in 3 contemplations concerned with the mind, found under the 3rd and 4th Satipatthana. Conditionality. The distinct difference between the 3rd and 4th Satipatthana is a direct working with conditionality. With the practice done so far, conditionality already came up with contemplation of the elements and contemplation of death in the form of realization of the dependency of the body on the elements, and in particular on a constant supply of oxygen, whose termination equals the ending of life. Conditionality then came to the forefront of attention with the 2nd Satipatthana, by way of becoming directly aware of a crucial link independent arising, feeling as the condition for the arising of craving. Conditionality is also a significant undercurrent in the contemplation of mental states, which soon enough makes it patently clear that we are not in control even in our own mind. Instead, the state of our mind is the product of causes and conditions, only some of which fall within the sphere of our direct influence. With contemplation of dharmas and an active exploration of conditionality is an explicit part of the instructions. What are the conditions that lead to the arising of the hindrances or the awakening factors? What are the conditions for overcoming the former and fostering the latter? Mindfully exploring these conditions is the central task of contemplation of dharmas. The resultant thrust of these 2 contemplations of dharmas can, in a way, be seen as an exemplification of the famous dictum that one who sees dependent arising sees the Dharma, and one who sees the Dharma sees dependent arising. That's from Majjhima Nikaya 28. Directing our meditative seeing to conditionality comes in the present Satipatthana, with a specific focus on those mental conditions that will lead to a state of mental balance in which the breakthrough to awakening can take place. Needless to say, the realization of Nibbana is the converging point of all the teachings, the Dharma. Thus, the combination of practically applied conditionality with overall direction of progress to awakening seems to capture the gist of these two contemplations of dharmas. Applied to situations outside of formal meditation, this gist can be actualized by taking into account whatever conditions present themselves in any situation and then relating these in one way or another to the liberating teachings. Although not every situation will be conducive to a cultivation of the awakening factors, there is hardly a situation or experience that cannot be considered from the viewpoint of the teachings. Reflections along the lines of, for example, all things are impermanent, can provide just the input needed to ensure that the taste of the Dharma comes to pervade all of our experiences. The actual instruction for contemplation of the first of the 5 hindrances proceeds as follows, from Majjhima Nikaya 10. If sensual desire is present within one knows sensual desire is present within me, or if sensual desire is not present within, one knows sensual desire is not present within me, and one knows how unarisen sensual desire rises, one knows how arisen sensual desire is removed, and one knows how removed sensual desire does not arise in the future. The type of instruction applied to each of the 5 hindrances, which are sensual desire, anger, sloth and torpor, restlessness and worry, doubt, comparable to the 2-stage procedure apparent in contemplation of feelings, contemplation of a hindrance also seems to proceed through 2 stages. The first stage is a recognition of the presence or absence of a hindrance in the mind. The second stage involves the distinct flavor of contemplation of dharmas in the form of a practical exploration of conditionality. Such exploration concerns the conditions that lead to the arising of a particular hindrance, the conditions that can lead to its removal, and the conditions that can prevent its recurrence. This 2-stage procedure can conveniently be related to the fact that a hindrance can manifest in different degrees of strength. In the case of a weak occurrence of a hindrance, mindful recognition may be enough for it to disappear. In such a case, from a practical viewpoint, we might just resume our main practice. After all, conditions for its arising must have been rather weak, and the condition leading to its removal has clearly been mindfulness in itself. At other times, a hindrance can come up with greater strength. Becoming aware of it does not in itself suffice. This seems the appropriate situation for proceeding to the second stage of contemplation of the hindrances. In this way, the presence of a hindrance in the mind can become a learning opportunity. The learning opportunity it affords concerns the conditionality of our own mind. In particular, those conditions that lead to the arising of the hindrance, as well as those conditions most helpful for emerging from it and preventing its recurrence. Facing a hindrance. The type of attitude that I would recommend for this type of contemplation is similar to that of a good chess player. Imagine playing a game of chess with a good friend. Our friend has just made a threatening move, attacking our queen. We will not get angry because of that. After all, it is just a game, and the other player is our good friend. Yet at the same time, we do want to win. With this type of attitude, wanting to win without getting angry, we examine the situation. Let me see, how did I get into this? How come I am now in the situation of being about to lose my queen? On examining how this happened, we keep a lookout for the type of move that will save our queen. In other words, we try to identify the condition that will lead us out of this situation. For contemplation of the hindrances, I recommend the same type of attitude. This involves almost an element of playfulness, combined with a strong intention to win the game. The more experienced we become with this type of game, the better chance we will have to win in the future, even to the extent of avoiding that our queen be put in danger in the first place. When viewed from this perspective, the occurrence of a hindrance becomes an occasion to train our skills rather than a trigger for frustration and negative self-evaluation. By cultivating such an attitude, we learn to take a hindrance less personally. The honest recognition that a hindrance is present does not mean that we have to own it and make it mine. It can just be seen as something that has manifested in the mind, requiring appropriate action to be taken. Taking a hindrance less personally not only eases possible tenseness of the mind when the presence of a hindrance is recognized, it also pays off in relation to its future recurrence. The degree to which this particular mental condition can actually function as a hindrance, in the sense of obstructing our inner clarity, is inexorably interwoven with the degree of our identification with the images and associations it conjures up in the mind. The more we grow accustomed to no longer taking it personally, the better our chances that the next time it manifests, we will be less easily caught up in the tendrils of identification. For this very reason, we are more easily able to step back from believing in the conjured up images and realize what is taking place. Similar to the case of contemplation of mental states, it is helpful to explore the texture of the mind that is under the influence of a hindrance, to savor it distinctly and get a clear sense of its flavor. As mentioned in the previous chapter on contemplation of the mind, when a hindrance is present, our mind is neither great nor concentrated nor liberated. However, it is also surpassable, and learning how to surpass this obstructive condition will lead in the direction of the mind increasingly becoming greater, more concentrated, and more liberated. Whenever this happens, we can similarly explore the texture of the mind from which the hindrances are absent, to savor this condition distinctly and get a clear sense of its flavor. Strictly speaking, actual removal of a hindrance is not a task of satipatthana. Instead, it belongs to the realm of right effort. As also mentioned in the previous chapter, for satipatthana to lead to awakening, it needs to be practiced within the framework of the Noble Eightfold Path. A discourse in the Satipatthana Samyutta explicitly clarifies that the path leading to the cultivation of Satipatthana is the Noble Eightfold Path. This Noble Eightfold Path requires an initial appreciation of right view and the arousing of right intention, which leads on to building a foundation of moral conduct in its mental, verbal, and physical dimensions. Based on this foundation and a clear sense of direction by way of right view, right effort stands in its proper place, ready to assist when mere mindful contemplation is insufficient. Needless to say, the employment of right effort does not stand on its own. It requires mindful monitoring in order to avoid both excess and deficiency in its deployment. So we can hear two very different styles of communicating in that way. Both Bhante Analio and Succito, conjuring up different images, but also it seems their approaches or the way they think about these things is a bit different. Just with Ajahn Succito's language, and sort of one is almost a logical approach with Bhante Analio. I think it requires intuition, but Alampa Succito's seems to come from like a bodily, intuitive sense, intuitive awareness kind of how I would take it. Are there any comments or questions coming up? Although we thought somebody might ask about where he Bhante Analio talks about that the just looking for when he stated this, when he said that the Satipatthana is not actually for removing the hindrances, which may not always be so obvious, or I'm not sure if it's just stated in a way that's too extreme, like it's just not for this.
Yeah, to me that's a bit of a kind of an academic distinction. That, I mean, because even in the Satipatthana it says one knows not only its arising and passing, but also how to deal with it when it has arisen, how to abandon when it has arisen, how to which is right effort for sure, but saying that it actually doesn't appear in the Satipatthana seems a bit concocted.
And what's that refrain that runs throughout the Satipatthana about, like, removing covetousness and grief in relation to the world.
Yeah.
And I've heard that can often be like a shorthand for the 5 hindrances.
Yeah, although he makes a point that I think is good around that particular point in that, it's not like, because that's stated at the beginning of the whole Satipatthana, the removing desires and discontents or covetousness and grief for the world.
Not throughout the whole.
I can't remember the beginning of each segment maybe, but he says that some people will interpret that as like before you even engage with Satipatthana, you need to, get rid of the 5 hindrances. But he says, that's clearly not the case, and points out several reasons why it's not the case, and that it just, that covetousness and grief or desires and discontents, means that's where you have that intention to start to abandon those, but that they don't necessarily, it would be sort of a fruitless endeavor to say that you have to completely eliminate all of the 5 hindrances before you start Satipatthana, because Satipatthana deals with letting go of the 5 hindrances, in part. So they may not be actually synonymous, or may represent like, that's the beginning stage. You start with abandoning that, intention to be involved with the world through the desires or discontents. I'm not sure where in that book, in his Satipatthana book, he might actually go into that a little bit. But,
yeah, he has this is his 3rd, maybe even 4th book, Satipatthana book. So it's, he has the first one is defining, really getting into the definition of what the Satipatthana is, and then the other one is further explorations of that, and then this one's supposed to be a practice guide, so he's actually giving advice to how to practice with it as opposed to solely kind of defining it. Or it's not solely in the other books, but it's mostly focused on that. What is the Buddha actually teaching in the Satipatthana? But this is, I think it's a way of at least saying what he said around that. It's more of a neat distinction he's trying to make, like kind of put it all in one particular category or another. This is not exactly fit in with this, and this is right up. And so, as you were saying, I don't think Ajahn Cunda fits in with actually how we practice it into neat categories like that, dealing with the mind.
It's all not so sequential and perfectly ordered.
And that is what I appreciate about Lumpur Succito's teachings, is he kind of gets into the experience of our own minds and then touches on how to utilize the Satipatthana in this particular way, the enlightenment factors, and he does so in a way of just kind of explaining how that works, in particular, how we might face some of the typical things that arise in our experience, and then, for example, the enlightenment factors can help with dealing with those, rather than saying one isn't working in this way and does work in that way. We have a little more time. I thought since we had the sensual pleasure that Majjhima Nikaya 75 that Ajahn Cunda read out the other day could deal with anger. So I just wanted to read a brief thing about what Montinaya said. So the instructions for the hindrances of anger are: if anger is present within one knows anger is present within me. Or if anger is not present within, one knows anger is not present within me. And one knows how unarisen anger arises, one knows how arisen anger is removed, and one knows how removed anger does not arise in the future. Here again, mindful recognition or else investigation of what triggered the anger may at times suffice for it to go into abeyance. If this is not the case, we could direct attention to the impermanent nature of painful feelings. Whatever painful feelings there might be, because of having been hurt or slighted by others, all such feelings are anyway bound to pass away. This understanding will diminish the subjective sense of a pressing need to take strong action on the external level against whoever has prompted our experience of painful feelings. If contemplation of the impermanent nature of painful feelings is not sufficient to emerge from the arisen anger, the contemplation of the elements can offer additional help. Proceeding through the 4 body scans to discern earth, water, fire, and wind will keep the mind occupied and root mindfulness in the body, as well as arouse the perception of emptiness. Combining with this insight into the empty nature of the mind can go a long way in undermining the sense of a hurt ego that often nourishes anger. The same undermining of a sense of ego also helps to get out the tendency to compare ourselves with others, resulting in subtle manifestations of anger in the form of competitiveness and envy. The standard antidote to a tendency to anger is the cultivation of metta. This reflects the opening of the heart mentioned in the previous chapter. In fact, the Sedaka Sutta relates metta to satipatthana meditation, whereby we protect ourselves as well as others. The cultivation of mindfulness and that of metta share this quality of protection. The same nuance of protection through metta is of relevance for external manifestations of anger. Mindful recognition that someone else is under the influence of this particular hindrance can naturally lead over to the appropriate response to the situation by way of cultivating metta. So I picked out a sutta that doesn't actually talk about sort of so much in the beginning, the antidote of anger. But, it's a bit of an entertaining sutta nonetheless, about how an enemy wishes for an enemy something when it comes to anger. And it's quite a unique sutta. You'll see. Anger. This is from Samyutta Nikaya, Book of the Sevens, Sutta 64. Bhikkhus, there are these 7 things that are gratifying and advantageous to an enemy that come upon an angry man or woman. What 7? Here, bhikkhus, an enemy wishes for an enemy. May he be ugly. For what reason? An enemy does not delight in the beauty of an enemy. When an angry person is overcome and oppressed by anger, though he may be well-bathed, well-anointed, with trimmed hair and beard, dressed in white clothes, still he is ugly. This is the first thing gratifying and advantageous to an enemy that comes upon an angry man or woman. Again, an enemy wishes for an enemy. May he sleep badly. For what reason? An enemy does not delight when an enemy sleeps well. When an angry person is overcome and oppressed by anger, though he may sleep on a couch spread with rugs, blankets, and covers, with an excellent covering of antelope hide, with a canopy of red bolsters at both ends, still he sleeps badly. This is the second thing gratifying and advantageous to an enemy that comes upon an angry man or woman. Again, an enemy wishes for an enemy, may he not succeed. For what reason? An enemy does not delight in the success of an enemy. When an angry person is overcome and oppressed by anger, if he gets what is harmful, he thinks, I have gotten what is beneficial. And if he gets what is beneficial, he thinks, I have gotten what is harmful. When overcome by anger, he gets these things that are diametrically opposed. They lead to his harm and suffering for a long time. This is the third thing gratifying and advantageous to an enemy that comes upon an angry man or woman. Again, an enemy wishes for an enemy. May he not be wealthy. For what reason? An enemy does not delight in the wealth of an enemy. When an angry person is overcome and oppressed by anger, kings appropriate for the royal treasury any wealth he has acquired by energetic striving, amassed by the strength of his arms, earned by the sweat of his brow, righteous wealth righteously gained. This is the fourth thing gratifying and advantageous to an enemy that comes upon an angry man or woman. Again, an enemy wishes for an enemy, may he not be famous. For what reason? An enemy does not delight in the fame of an enemy. When an angry person is overcome and oppressed by anger, he loses whatever fame he had acquired through heedfulness. This is the fifth thing gratifying and advantageous to an enemy that comes upon an angry man or woman. Again, an enemy wishes for an enemy, may he have no friends. For what reason? An enemy does not delight in an enemy having friends. When an angry person is overcome and oppressed by anger, his friends and companions, relatives and family members, avoid him from afar. This is the sixth thing gratifying and advantageous to an enemy that comes upon an angry man or woman. Again, an enemy wishes for an enemy, with the breakup of the body after death, may he be reborn in a plane of misery and a bad destination in the lower world in hell. For what reason? An enemy does not delight in an enemy's going to a good destination. When an angry person is overcome and oppressed by anger, he engages in misconduct by body, speech, and mind. As a consequence, still overcome by anger, with the break of the body, after death, he is reborn in a plane of misery, in a bad destination, in the lower world, in hell. This is the seventh thing gratifying and advantageous to an enemy that comes upon an angry man or woman. These are the 7 things gratifying and advantageous to an enemy that comes upon an angry man or woman. So now here is the stanzas. The angry person is ugly, he also sleeps badly. Having gained some benefit, he takes it to be harmful. The angry person overcome by anger, having slain by body and speech, incurs the loss of wealth. Maddened by anger, he acquires a bad reputation. His relatives, friends, and loved ones avoid the angry person. Anger is a cause of harm. Anger stirs up mental turmoil. People do not recognize the peril that has risen from within. The angry person doesn't know the good. The angry person doesn't see the Dhamma. There is just blindness and dense gloom when anger overcomes a person. When an angry person causes damage, whether easily or with difficulty, later, when the anger has vanished, he is tormented as if burnt by fire. He shows recalcitrance as a fire does a smoky crest. When his anger spreads outward, people become angry on his account. He has no shame or fear of wrong. His speech is not respectful. One overcome by anger has no island of safety at all. I will tell you about the deeds that produce torment. Listen to them as they are. Remote from those that are righteous. An angry person slays his father. An angry person slays his own mother. An angry person slays a Brahmin. An angry person slays a worldling. The angry worldling slays his mother, the good woman who gave him life, the one by whom he was nurtured and who showed him this world. Those beings, like oneself, each hold their self most dear. Yet those who are angry kill themselves in various ways when they are distraught about diverse matters. Some kill themselves with the sword, some who are distraught swallow poison, some hang themselves with ropes, some jump into a mountain gorge. Deeds that involve destroying growth and deeds that cause their own death. When doing such deeds, they do not know that defeat is born of anger. Thus, death's snare, hidden in the heart, has taken the form of anger. One should cut it off by self-control, wisdom, energy, and right view. The wise person should eradicate this one unwholesome quality. In such a way, one should train in the Dhamma. Do not yield to recalcitrance. Free from anger, their misery gone, free from delusion, no longer avid, tamed, having abandoned anger, the taintless ones attain Nibbana.
If we get that down. I was just curious, that very last little bit of list of how one abandons anger. There were 4 things like wisdom and whatever, but it didn't include, actually, he didn't include metta.
No, it didn't. It was a very unique sutta when I read it.
I mean, it was really emphasizing the, right view of the abandonment and the use of wisdom in that one.
Yeah, it was, and that was quite different than the last part of it.
Yeah.
And it was really rounded out difference. It says, one should cut it off by self-control, wisdom, energy, and right view. And it is, differently than what we just read from Ante Nalia. This is a very different sutta in terms of the expression of ill will, and then how to deal with it. Of course, what's interesting in this is it's an explanation of how anger works, sort of the conditions and the results, but then it really goes on to just saying, the sort of thrust of the whole sutta is how negative and how much bad karma is created with the result of anger. It's only in the end that there really is a kind of saying, so here's how bad it is, here's how you deal with it. There's only 2-3 stanzas on that. So, abandoning. So it's
recognizing the downside of it is
more
than half the battle.
Or, according to the sutta, that's the whole thing. Self-control. It's an interesting, I'm not sure what the Pali for that is, but wisdom, panya, virya, and might be something to do.
Self-control maybe meaning don't act on it.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's just restraint or relinquish. And then not yielding to. I thought Bhikkhu Bodhi's word on recalcitrance was quite a unique way of thinking about anger as well. But I think as Max was talking about the other day, it's so easy for us to, to see that we have tendencies, underlying tendencies in our own personal tendencies. Whereas, I was speaking to someone the other day, I said, "What does they were expressing how they have tendency towards aversion. I said, is it self or other?" And it was most obvious to them in the practice that it's aimed at other people around them. It doesn't really go in, or at least the kind of papancha, the recurring thoughts are not towards oneself. But I've also seen, that might be what appears to be the case, like when we're that whole kind of thing when you're pointing at somebody else, you have three fingers pointing back at you because you're often actually expressing. You have to live up to that own tormented mind, that tyrant towards others. You have to live to the same kind of level as what you're demanding of other people. So it's an oppressive state of mind either way. But that's just one of the 5 hindrances. The sensuality, I think, is something that we often deal with quite often. So I appreciate Don Sampan with the Ajahn Nikaya 75 today was talking about. Also the metaphor, the sense sometimes one has with like sensual pleasure, sensuality is really like it doesn't feel very bad at all. It feels good, which is why it tends to be so difficult to let go of. But then anger is like red hot, and it's so painful. It's like scorching, being burned.
The sensual desire is harder to get rid of. But not as damaging to oneself as anger can be very damaging to oneself as well as others. But it's easier to get rid of because it's so unpleasant.
Yeah, you want to let it go. But then there's always delusion. I really appreciated that one stanza that he says, when an angry person is overcome and oppressed by anger, if he gets what is harmful, he thinks, I've gotten what is beneficial. If he gets what is beneficial, he thinks, I've gotten what is harmful. The complete delusion of the actual experience. So that ends up ends with our chapter on the hindrances. I think we're going to start with the khandhas now.
Yep.
I had one more sutta, but I think we're out of time.
Yep.
So,
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.